We're now going to begin our last session of the day, and I'd like to recognize our moderator for this session, Paul WALDIE of the Globe and Mail, and it is my pleasure to introduce the Premier. Ontario's CPA profession has partnered with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce for many years on the Ontario Economic Summit, and it's certainly easy to see why. An event like this gathers a contingent of our province's thought leaders from business, government, non-for-profits, and academia together in one room, and it's a great opportunity. It allows us to take some time to raise issues, collaborate, share ideas, and discuss strategies for making Ontario all that it can and should be. There are few limits to what Ontario can achieve when business and government share common goals and visions. And I have to admit that I was particularly excited about this year's summit because, dare I say, the change is in the air. For the first time in a long time, the vision of our federal and provincial governments are closely aligned. Where the past saw tension and inaction, there's a new hope that things will actually get done. Whether we talk about healthcare, infrastructure, energy, and environmental policy, I think it's safe to say that we're in for a very active few years of change. Today, we're going to hear from a woman who is largely responsible for that new hope. WYNNE started by focusing her own campaign on a platform founded on the principle that government has a positive and important role to play in building our province up. Rather than follow conventional political wisdom, she set out to convince the people of Ontario that new investments in transportation and infrastructure investment was more important than rushing to balance the budget. That government couldn't just sit on their hands when it knew that future pension incomes could not meet the future cost of living. And she talked unapologetically about our obligations to protect our planet from the causes of climate change. Sound familiar? By winning convincingly in her 2014 election, Premier WYNNE began to lay the groundwork for Justin Trudeau's platform. But she didn't stop there. In a bold move, she stuck her neck out when Trudeau looked destined for defeat and actively worked for his victory. While most provincial premiers simply watched the federal election with interest, WYNNE boldly declared that the province of Ontario needed a federal partner to work with and put her personal reputation on the line. As we all saw on October 19th, that strategy paid off as the Liberals won a majority government. Now, one of our key jobs at this summit and in the months that follow is to help turn that victory for the Liberal Party into a victory for Ontario and Canada. For that to happen, we must not be content for just our levels of government to work together. We must also continue to find new ways for the public and private sector to work together. I've personally had the pleasure of working with WYNNE when I was at the Toronto Region Board of Trade on infrastructure and investment, and now, more recently, with CPA Ontario as we look to introduce a new Chartered Professional Accountants Act. I know this Premier understands that while no society succeeds without a vibrant and growing private sector, nor can its businesses succeed without the work of a robust and competent public sector. She also knows that while we may not always agree, we must always find a way to work together. Now, permit me to more formally introduce our special guest this morning. Premier WYNNE is Ontario's 25th Premier and the first woman elected to lead our province. The groundbreaking MPP from Don Valley West was originally elected as Toronto School Trustee, then an MPP in 2003. She was elected a leader of the Ontario Liberal Party in January 2013 and sworn in as Premier. She's brought a wealth of experience to her job as Premier, having previously served as Minister of Agriculture and Food, Municipal Affairs and Housing, Aboriginal Affairs, Transportation, and Education. Re-elected in June 2014 with a majority mandate, Premier WYNNE has since demonstrated that she's not afraid to make hard choices or take calculated risks, nor should she ever be underestimated. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming this exceptional Ontarian and truly one of Canada's most influential leaders.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. It's wonderful to be here with you, and Imagine what bold would have been if the outcome of the election had been different. But I was glad to be bold. Good morning, bonjour, bonjour, Annie. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. And as you know, we're gathered here on the traditional territory of the six nations of the Grand River Territory and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. Carol, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the work that you've done, you with the Toronto Regional Board of Trade and now with the CPA. And Ed Clark, thank you so much for your participation. One of my constant critics in the legislature calls you my embedded banker. So I just want everyone here to know that you are very valued as our embedded banker and advisor, and that you are, what you need to know about Ed is that he is a catalyst for very lively debate in our offices. So thank you very much. That's how it should be. And I want to thank Alan Odette and the Ontario Chamber of Commerce for the work that they do. This annual summit brings together business and government leaders to ask tough questions and to uncover common priorities and tackle our challenges, because we do share common priorities for a healthy Ontario, for an Ontario that's growing. So thank you for the work that you do. And I know that this is something that you facilitate all year long. It's not just at this time of year that you take an active role. So thank you. Merci de jouer un rôle actif dans la construction d'une économie plus vigoureuse. Now, active is also the word that I would use to describe our government's role in the economy. And as Carol said, and as Ed talked about, I really believe in government's role in playing a positive, in having a positive impact on our economy and our society. I think government can be and must be a force for good in people's lives, and that means playing an active role. And in order to help your businesses compete and grow, we're actively interested in what we can do to do that. And I really appreciated the conversation that I had last night with CEOs and people from different business backgrounds, and the ideas that they had for how we can play an even more active role in facilitating and creating an environment for your growth. So I know that we have to actively invest in people and in their talents and skills. We're doing that. We're also actively investing in modern infrastructure as we make the largest infrastructure investment in Ontario's history. We're actively creating a more dynamic and innovative business environment, and we are actively building retirement security for the millions of people in this province who do not have a workplace pension. Now, that's the top line of our four-part plan to build a stronger economy for today and for tomorrow. But it's only part of the picture. And that's why this conversation is so important, because your bottom line, the private sector bottom line, completes that. Your business decisions, the investments that you do or do not make, as I'm sure Paul WALDIE and I will talk about, the path that your innovations take to market. And this gets to the problem that we were discussing last night at the roundtable with presidents and CEOs, which is this. So in today's highly competitive global economy, the skilled workforce, modern infrastructure, innovative ecosystem, competitive tax rates, and strategic partnerships that we're investing in are all necessary for the kind of growth that we want to see. But they don't necessarily get us there. We know we have to have all those things, but they don't necessarily get us there. And that's the conversation I think that Kevin and Ed were just having. Those things are the price of entry. There's no question about that. And we've bought in. But so has California. So has New York and the UK and places around the world. So what are the other ingredients? What are the other things that we need to be doing in order to be at our best? And Ed talked about the car. It's a nice car. And we're in the race. And the work that we've done together this past few years has us well positioned. But we can't be content or complacent, and I think we all know that, and that's why this discussion is so important. And it's one reason that I'm leaving for California this weekend to promote our tech and creative arts sectors. And from there, I'm going on to China for my second mission to China with a delegation of science and clean tech firms on a follow-up to the trade mission that I led last fall. And to that point about exporting and the sort of attitude that we have in this province and in this country toward exporting, particularly in this province, I think that part of that culture shift that we are looking for is how do we assume, how do young business owners, how do business owners who are looking to expand, how do they automatically see themselves as part of a global economy instead of thinking about the internal markets, the markets that we've always attached ourselves to? How do we foster that sense that I think exists in other places, and I think to a greater extent exists in the United States, that as I start this business, I'm going to be playing in the global economy. I'm going to be looking for markets all over the world. And that's not an automatic position, I think, that traditionally people in this country have taken. So we've got to work to foster that. So the conditions that we're putting in place aren't enough. We need to create opportunities by actively promoting your products and increasingly your services and providing the facilitation for that. Our diverse economy, our manufacturing acumen that has been built up over years and years, decades, our increasingly educated and skilled workforce combine to deliver a cross-sector service expertise with incredible growth potential. And critically, this potential exists in markets beyond established trade partners like the US. So service exports are an opportunity, and Ed talked about that, thinking about our service capacity as not just a liability, but as an asset that we can leverage. But I think more than seeing these as opportunities, they're imperatives, because as I've been arguing, we need to work together to set ourselves apart where we are competitive. We have to capitalize on those areas. And we all know it's not going to be in low-skill, low-wage industries. Nor will we compete by giving polluters a free pass or by standing by while workers enter retirement without enough savings. That's not who we are as Ontarians. And in that very interesting discussion that Kevin and Ed had here, and that, quite frankly, we are having within government about regulation, it is finding the balance between the outcome that we are looking for and the protections that people believed needed to be in place, and those were the reasons for the regulations in the first place. It's finding that balance, and I think we can do it, but it means we have to question ourselves in a way that we haven't before. And I believe that the comparison that Ed was talking about between jurisdictions is what is going to help us to do that, because there are lots of jurisdictions, and I used the example of driver's licenses. As the Minister of Transportation, I knew that there were places, if you get your driver's license in the UK, you can drive in Ontario. And so we need to look at where are we overburdening businesses, and I think we can do that by looking at those comparisons. So in Ontario, just to go back to the point about what we can or cannot sacrifice, in Ontario we don't measure economic success by that single-minded pursuit of growth. We measure success by what growth means for our standard of living, for the prospects of our children, what opportunities they will have in their working lives. And what that means is if growth undermines people's wages, if it undermines their retirement or the environment, then that's false growth. It leaves us worse off in the end. And so we're not willing to make those sacrifices. We've got to find the balance. So I just want to, for one moment, I want to challenge the notion that we have to choose between being business friendly and competitive on the one hand, and being fair to our workers and the environment and future generations on the other hand. So first, if we take the workplace, we're undertaking a review of Ontario's labor laws in order to ensure that we're adapting to the changing economy, and as we do, becoming more competitive. And I'm confident that with your input, and this is one of the great things about this relationship, with your input, then the Changing Workplaces Review will have meaning consultations that will result in positive developments, yes, for workers, but also for businesses. So I would ask that you engage with us on that, in that conversation. The second one is pensions. We all know that there's a gap that exists, and that in June of 2014, we were elected with a mandate to help to bridge that gap. In consulting with you, and I would just note that we've had individual discussions, there have been group conversations. We heard real concerns about a new universal plan that could affect your decisions to invest, to hire, and to grow. We heard that clearly. We heard from employers who already have strong workplace pension plans, and many of you are in the room. We also heard that small business would need time to adjust, and that all businesses would prefer a plan that was phased in over time. So when we announced the details of the Ontario Retirement Pension Plan this past spring, comparability and phasing in were key details, and they were guided by the Chamber Network's comments that you'd given to us. And I heard clearly when I was in Cornwall from many of your members. So by working with you, we're building a better ORPP. And I understand your concerns, but more than that, I share them because I need us to be able to build your businesses and to create a more competitive environment for you. So that's why I was also active in calling for a new government in Ottawa, why I took that, what is now being called a bold move. It was being called other things at the time, but that's why I stepped forward, because I knew that we needed a partner at the federal level, because having a federal partner that shares our priorities, agrees that now it's time to invest in jobs and growth, to fight climate change, and to secure our future is unquestionably good for Ontario as it is for the country. So although the new government's not yet sworn in, some people have already asked questions about the future of the ORPP. Here's what I have always said, and I will continue to say. We're designing the ORPP to build on the strengths of the Canada Pension Plan, so on the strengths of the CPP, so that it can more easily integrate with an enhanced CPP if that route, which has not been available to us, and it was the one that we chose 2 years ago, but it has not been available to us, but if that route becomes more viable. But for the CPP enhancement to take the place of the ORPP, it has to provide a similar benefit for the 2/3 of Ontarians without a workplace pension plan at all, and protect their retirements by paying out a retirement income comparable to that we are designing with the ORPP. And I will just say that when I met Prime Minister-designate Trudeau earlier this week, we agreed that the incoming federal government in Ontario will be active partners in the national discussion on pension enhancement, including the CPP and the ORPP. But we have to accept that the national discussion will take time. The new Prime Minister will have to work with premiers across the country. There isn't uniform agreement on exactly what the path should be forward, and so we'll work with the federal government as we design an ORPP that could be folded into an adequate enhancement of the CPP. And we will continue to work with you on that design. So thanks to that new partnership, we'll be able to actually have that discussion. And the federal government, we've already got agreement that the new federal government will work with Ontario on administration and registration of the ORPP, which will make a huge difference to businesses, and certainly is the minimum that we might have expected. So I'm very, very pleased about that. So just to conclude, this is an exciting time to build a business in Ontario. There is lots going on there. Of course, there are huge challenges, but there is a feeling that there is opportunity, and some of that is born of necessity, of course, but most of it is born of the fundamentals that we have in this province, the conditions that we have, including our incredibly well-trained workforce. One of the discussions that I know we'll have over the coming months is how we better align our education system and our labor force I've had meetings with university presidents, college presidents, and we continue to talk about how we can design even more opportunities for that kind of alignment. But we have a new federal partner. Growth forecasts in Ontario show that we will be among Canada's leading provinces in the near future, and we have what the world wants. You know, our government is determined to help you sell it, but we know that there are people from all over the world who come here, who want to be here, who want their businesses to be here, and for the lack of some infrastructure, which we are now building, for the lack of some incentives, which we are working to put in place, they're not coming, but we're going to continue to bring them here. And even as we know what the competition is capable of, we can be confident that we can meet those challenges. So thank you so much. I'll just end with a little story from last night. I was talking with someone who I had talked with last year, and he's into his 6th year now in Ontario, and he's looking to get citizenship, which we're very happy about. And I said to him, why are you going to keep your family here and live here as opposed to go back to Great Britain where you came from? And we talked a little bit about the communities in this province. And then he said, when his friends come, he likes to show them the greengrocers who, at night, leave their produce, leave their wares on the street and just put a little fence around it. And in the morning, all of it's still there. And it's a tiny story, but it's a piece of who we are as Ontario, and it's a piece of the quality of life that we offer to the world and the model that we offer. And I think we shouldn't underestimate it. That's part of that's part of who we are as Ontarians, and it's all part of the economic opportunity that exists here. That includes the social conditions and the quality of life that we are so privileged to enjoy. So thank you very much. Merci, Miguel.
Well, thanks very much.
Thanks, Paul.
Pleasure to be here. I just want to ask real quick before we get started, you talking about the ORPP, and I wasn't quite clear on what you said. Would you drop it if the federal government expands the CPP?
So if any enhancement that was designed dealt with the 2/3 of the population that doesn't have a workplace pension plan, because that's the problem that we
Right.
are trying to solve. And if that enhancement were adequate to the level that we've identified as being necessary, absolutely. So that's the conversation
Okay.
we'll be having with
Okay.
but you know, it'll be a conversation, Paul, around the table with all of the premiers.
Okay.
And we're not all in the same place.
Right. Okay, well, let's start on the bigger picture then. Last week, Bank of Canada lowered its outlook for the Canadian economy, said the oil overhang is going to last at least a couple of years. The job market is pretty stagnant right now. There's a pretty harsh questionnaire on the tables here, and I saw the results for last year's questionnaire, which weren't very good. Lots of concern out there. You've got a pretty big deficit now. How are you going to possibly fulfill some of these priorities you were just talking about?
Well, we're on track to, if you're talking about the deficit, I mean, we're on track to eliminate the deficit by 2017-18. My responsibility is to recognize the challenges, but you know, I don't have the luxury of being able to sit and wring my hands about it. You know, we have to dig in. We have to take the actions that we've looked at other jurisdictions and say, okay, well, what are the things that we can do here in Ontario that build on our strengths? So when I talk about our talent and skills, when I go to the plants, the business places of the people who are making things or starting businesses or expanding businesses in Ontario, I hear over and over and over again that our workforce is a huge advantage, and people coming here, they can count on having smart, educated people, and so if that's one of our strengths, then we need to build on that.
Where's the money going to come from, though? That's, I guess, the question a lot of people have. If we have a big deficit, you're trying to ratchet down, and we have a sluggish economy that's not going to generate a heck of a lot of tax revenue. Where's the money coming from?
Yeah, so we've put out an economic plan. We've put out a fiscal plan that has a bunch of components to it. So we did increase taxes. You know, we increased taxes in our last budget. We are leveraging assets, as everyone will know. There's a big discussion about Hydro One going on
We'll
right
talk
now.
about that.
Yeah, we'll come back to Hydro One. I'm sure the Twitter sphere asked you questions questions about that. We are making decisions to sell off some of the, we sold the GM shares, we sold some real estate. We're investing in infrastructure that is going to foster growth. So we have made a decision to not balance our budget early by making deep cuts, but by leaving that 2017-18 date in place and making the investments that will foster growth. Because when I talk to companies, I had these conversations in China the last time I was there, and they said, we'd like to come to Ontario. We're not sure about your ability to build infrastructure. Now, we can't build infrastructure as quickly as the Chinese. Mm-hmm. That's just a reality. But they look at us and they want to know that we are committed to doing the things that will allow them to move their goods. If we can do that, then we will continue to be the #1 jurisdiction for foreign direct investment.
It's interesting because one jurisdiction that, of course, you guys would be very familiar with that is really hurting us is Mexico. We've lost a lot of plants to Mexico, and it's not because of the low wages they pay or anything like that in Mexico. It's because their regulatory framework appears to be a lot more sympathetic, understanding, whatever. You can get things built, you can get things done in Mexico a lot faster.
Yep.
We were talking to the head of Trans-Canada Pipelines, and he was telling us how quickly it was to get a pipeline approved down there. You've seen the auto plants pulling up, not investing in Ontario, but going down there. How do we deal with that? What does the government do? Does the government go the Quebec route and spend more money on Bombardier, or do you change the regulations? What does the government do?
Well, first of all, we have had investment in auto here. But
we're still losing plants.
You're right. We're competing with Mexico. So Ed talked about the regulatory approach that we're taking. We're looking at other jurisdictions, and we've had a process in Ontario where we've counted regulations, and we've said, every time you introduce a new regulation, you have to take a number off the books. What that resulted in was a kind of superficial exercise, because it meant we were taking regulations off the books that actually weren't necessarily the things that were holding up business. So we've got to do, this is like open for business phase 2. We've got to be real about what it is that's actually impeding business. So that's one piece. I think the other piece, and we've heard about this a lot, is when someone wants to expand a business or bring a business or do something in Ontario, it's hard for people to find their way around government, and I have heard that a number of times. And so the notion of a concierge service, the notion of one door that, and I said this last night to folks, where you don't open a door and then they just point to a whole bunch of other doors, but they actually navigate you. Whoever is at that first door actually helps you to navigate and actually helps you to get things done quickly. I think that's something that
that's what
other
Mexico's
jurisdictions
doing, right? They brought the federal and state governments together to do just that.
Yeah, so I think we've got to be much, much better about that and not be complacent in the sense that, well, of course you want to come to Ontario and you'll just do whatever you have to do to be here. We have to assume that we have to roll out a carpet and help people to find their way. So that's the second part of that competitive edge that we need.
We talked about the new government, and one of the issues they're going to have to face immediately is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP trade agreement. Right. We haven't heard yet what this government thinks about it. What do you think about it?
Well, I'm excited about new markets. I think that having access to markets for the very reasons that we were just talking about in terms of the need to export, I think that's very important. At the same time, we have some challenges. There's no doubt in the auto sector. You've just identified, the auto sector is going through a transition in this province and in North America, quite frankly, not just Ontario. So we're anxious about exactly what that will mean to our auto parts sector and the issues around supply management. I've been the Minister of Agriculture and Food, and being the Minister of Agriculture and Food means you are managing risk all the time. That's just what it is. Mm-hmm. So the fact is that the supply management system actually manages risk and allows for predictability. Now,
gets us in a lot of trouble internationally.
It gets us into trouble internationally. I understand that, and it has to evolve. It has to change. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that we have a federal government that is going to work with us on that, because we do have people in the agri-food sector who understand that and who want to make rational decisions. But I don't want to kneecap our dairy and poultry producers in the process.
So the outgoing government proposed, now this was during the election nonetheless, but pretty substantial compensation for dairy and for some of the auto parts
Yeah.
makers. Is that the kind of thing you think the federal government should be looking at, or what you would be looking at?
Well, I think that the compensation, yes, I think the compensation is important. But that's not actually a long-term solution, right? If your sectors are going to be competitive, then there have to be other things that happen to make them competitive. So yes, we'll be talking about what the compensation is. But what I want to talk with our auto sector and we are in our agri-food sectors, how do we upscale? How do we make sure that we are as good as and as competitive as those sectors? China wants our food. They're interested in our food. Food security is a huge issue. Well, we get food security. We know how to do that. So let's leverage that knowledge and that capacity internationally.
All right, let's talk Hydro One, since we raised it.
Because
Obviously,
you weren't going to, right?
well, you raised it.
I know I started it. He started it.
That's right. Interesting, controversial. We've been through this before and it didn't work.
Yeah.
You guys are going at report out today suggesting that this will actually drive up the public debt because of the revenue you're going to lose. What about that? Why do it, and how do you address some of the criticism that's being raised about it?
So here's where we start. I said Ed started. He didn't actually start it. We started it because what I know is that we have to invest in infrastructure, Paul. We don't have an option about that. As a province, decade after decade, we kind of let infrastructure deteriorate. We weren't even investing, before 2003 when we came into office, we weren't even investing enough to maintain the infrastructure that we had, let alone build. And if you look at the numbers right now across the country, everything that municipal and provincial and federal governments are doing gets us to about 3%. And what we know is that if we're not investing 5% of GDP in infrastructure, then we're not building new. We're just kind of treading water. So I came into the leadership actually with a mandate to promote infrastructure investment. I did that at the national level with my colleague premiers. And so when I came into at the point where we were building our budgets and how are we going to do this, there were a number of things that we were going to do, and leveraging assets was one of them. And so we asked Ed and his team to look at the assets that the people of Ontario own, and it was a tough conversation. When I said Ed was a catalyst for lively debates, trust me, that was a lively debate, because
Yeah, but it's your call, right? Not his call, right?
exactly,
Right.
it was my call,
Right.
and that's why I'm saying I was convinced that this was the best thing to do because it would get us a couple of things. It would get us a substantial amount of money, so $4 billion is what we projected, to allow us to continue to add to that fund, because we had done other things to build infrastructure. And at the same time, we could retain enough ownership, the 40% ownership of Hydro One. Our belief is that it can be a better company. I mean, we've talked about that publicly. We would retain some control over the big decisions. And I know that the big attack is on electricity rates, but that's actually not. That's not where electricity rates are set. They're set by the OEB.
Right.
So in terms of the long term, we thought that this was the right way to go. The other factor is that the benefit, the economic benefit of the investments that we're going to make, I'm convinced that they will outweigh that long-term change in the revenue. I think that if we don't make these investments in infrastructure, we're going to be in a much worse position. So we are very, very convinced that making these investments will make us a more attractive jurisdiction, will allow us to compete with the jurisdictions that we are already competing with, and will allow businesses here to expand.
Okay, so it's going no matter what? You're not going to...
It's going, yeah.
All right. I got to talk about unions, because I couldn't be here without talking about unions and what's been going on lately. I mean, I'm thankful I don't have children in school anymore, because every time I pick up the paper, turn on the radio, there seems to be a work to rule or something going on, and I don't get it. I don't understand why these issues seem to keep coming up all the time. I think a lot of people are concerned about these payments, which I know you're trying to clarify, and you're going to explain to me why we pay unions to negotiate agreements and not get receipts for them. Walk me through all this. What's going on?
So let me just first of all put this in context because I was the Minister of Education in this province. We've had many, many years of labor peace. It was one of the things that we came into office in 2003, and we have worked very well with our labor partners. There is no doubt that for the last couple of years there have been challenges, and those are born of our financial situation. There's no doubt about it. I mean, there's a difficult conversation at a bargaining table when there's no new money for compensation. And I was committed to having a collective bargaining process that would play itself out and that would be respectful. So it just is difficult. That's the reality. In terms of the process that has required us to help to pay for negotiating, well, because it's a new process. It's the first time we've had a formal provincial process. There's going to be an accounting of those dollars, and the money hasn't flowed, so there will be an accounting of how that money was used. But remember, there used to be 72 boards that negotiated with their bargaining units, and not just one teachers union, but with their support staff and all of their unions. So 72 boards using public dollars, negotiating in their own boards. This is the first time we've had a formal provincial process. In the last couple of rounds, there's been an informal process where there was no requirement for boards and the unions to come to the table, and so there was an establishment of a protocol around how those costs were shared. And this is the first.
Okay, but there wasn't a requirement for you guys to pay their costs, right?
No, there's no requirement.
So why do
You're
it then?
right.
Why did we do it? Because isn't that prolong the negotiation? If I'm a union and I know you're going to come at me for $1 million for pizzas or whatever, aren't I just going to sit at the table longer?
So it's a $22 billion, $20+ billion enterprise, Paul. So there's always a cost of negotiation. When I talk about those 72 boards, I was involved at the school board level. You know, there's a cost of negotiations. There's no doubt about that. It's a long, some would say, antiquated process, but it takes a long time, and it's got its own rhythm, and there are costs associated with it. So we're going to make sure that we have the accounting of how that money was spent, and there won't be a first time again. This was the first time that there was this provincial process. And remember, we've got deals with most of the teachers in the province. We haven't got deals with this one group of teachers and support staff. So am I happy about that? Absolutely not. You know, my kids were in school at the time when there was labor unrest through pretty much their whole school career.
Mine too.
Yeah. So I've worked really hard as a member of a government, before as a minister and now as the premier, to make sure that relationship worked better. We've done pretty well. The last few weeks hasn't been
Okay,
so
so those
good.
payments aren't going to happen again. That was a one-off.
Well, yeah, because there won't be the first process again. But will there always be a cost to negotiations? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but it's who picks up the tab for that cost.
Exactly.
That's the issue.
Yeah.
So you're saying the government's not going to pick up the tab going forward?
You know what? I'm saying that there will always be a cost to negotiations, and there will be an accounting for that.
So they might pick up the tab.
Well, I think you need to look at negotiations across sectors. And you need to ask the question, has there ever been a case where employers have shared costs with employees? Yeah, there has been. And so I'm not going to draw a line in the sand.
They're not taxpayers.
Well,
if my company does it, who cares? But if you do it, I care.
Well, okay, but if the negotiation process is the same, and the money that teachers are using, you know, it's a public sector entity. The whole thing is public sector. All of the money that goes into our education system is public sector dollars.
Right. Okay. All right. Let's talk environment for a second.
Yeah.
Climate change. I know Conference Board or Chamber of Commerce has done a report on this issue. Cap and trade. Why do cap and trade? There's a lot of questions surrounding it now. It's not quite as in fashion as it used to be. A lot of folks are just saying, go with the straight up carbon tax. Cap and trade is not the way to go. Too many exemptions, too complicated, forget it. Why are you guys going to continue with the cap and trade, or are you going to continue it?
We are. We are continuing with cap and trade, and a couple of reasons. We're sitting beside Quebec. Quebec is part of a large North American market with California. We will make that larger and make it more efficient. So that made sense to me that we would work with Quebec and California. And quite frankly, we had agreed a number of years ago, before I was the Premier, that we would be part of the Western Climate Initiative. And I think that it makes more sense. And we've been able to work with Quebec and learn from Quebec. And I'll be seeing Governor Brown when I'm in California, and I think that it will be a good process for the people of Ontario. And the second reason is that I think that cap and trade offers the opportunity to incent innovation in a way that other systems don't necessarily. And so from a business perspective, I think that it allows for that flexibility that I think is good for our innovation economy.
Okay, so it's better than a carbon tax, or it's just a different option, or?
It's a different option. Right. It's the one that we've chosen. I think that one of the things that I've really appreciated about my conversations across the country with my colleague premiers is that there is no one size that fits all. So Christy Clark will sit here and tell you why the carbon tax is what they chose, and that it's working. I just think you pick your circumstance, you understand your circumstances. We're in this geographic connection with Quebec. I think it makes sense, and from my perspective, I see more opportunity for flexibility and innovation in it.
Okay, and I got to ask about one other topic that's near and dear to me, and that's beer. One question I get all the time
near and dear to lots of people, apparently.
Why can't I just go to the corner store? I lived in Britain for 2 years before I came back to take this job. In a tiny village, I could go across the street to my Spar store and buy a six-pack or a bottle of wine. Why can't I do that here? Why do we have this ridiculous system? Why do we have this system that's coming that is so hard to understand and so weird? Why not just open it up?
Well, okay, so we're not starting from a blank slate, right? We've got a system, we've got a distribution system in place in Ontario that has built up over years. I mean, talk about regulations that have been built up over years. Our alcohol distribution system is rooted in all sorts of things, including our Presbyterian background,
Right.
So we're working with the system that exists. And one of the challenges is that if we blow up that distribution system, we actually run the risk of increasing the cost of your beer. Because if you look at other jurisdictions that have a less efficient distribution network, that's actually what happens. So we're trying to protect that distribution system because it protects the cost to consumers, and at the same time broaden it so that it is more rational. If we were establishing the alcohol distribution system today, would it look the same? Of course it wouldn't. But the people of Ontario, I get equal number of emails saying that you should make it more open to you shouldn't be doing what you're doing,
Right.
I mean, it's
but it seems kind of weird. We're having a discussion about legalizing marijuana. And God help us if we ever try and get that into stores, corner stores. I mean, we can't even figure out.
So the emails I get on that is that it should just go into the LCBO.
Well, there you go. But I mean, really, do you think you're going to see a day? You're a lot younger than me, so in your lifetime,
no, I'm
are
not.
you going to see? Are we going to see a day where I can walk across the street to my 7-Eleven or wherever and buy a six-pack? Do you think we'll see that day in Ontario?
Well,
say yes, please.
Not under my. Not on my watch, you won't. But who knows? At some point you might. But there's not social license for that at this point. There just isn't.
Okay.
And we can have a debate about that. Here's one of the conversations we haven't had in this country, quite frankly, but in this province for sure. We have not had a discussion about how we're doing on the alcohol front. How are we doing with the kids with their backpacks with
the
beer
binge drinking and everything else.
Yeah. And so that's the other side of it. And I don't mean to sound like my Presbyterian ancestors, although it would be inconsistent. My staff will know if I didn't. That's a conversation that we have to have. I don't think it's related to the distribution particularly, but I think it's the reason that we get just as many emails saying don't open it up, there's too much alcohol, as we do saying open it up, give it to me everywhere.
Okay. And let me ask you this finally, because I don't even know how much time we have left, but you've been a good sport for staying here this long and answering these awful questions. But going forward now, you've got this new federal government that
Right.
Obviously you guys are going to have a better relationship than the last government. But are you still going to be able to, I know what your answer is, but I'll ask it anyway. Are you still going to be able to say no? Are you still going to be able to say, hang on, you're wrong, we can't do that, we have to do this? You know what I mean? Is it going to be too close a relationship?
No, I think that it's interesting because the other question I get asked is, well, what happens when Justin says no? So not just can
Exactly,
we say no
yeah.
when Justin Trudeau says no. I firmly believe that that's how relationships work, you know, that of course we're not going to agree on everything. There are going to be things that I do that he's not going to agree with and vice versa. But if there's enough of an ongoing constructive dialogue, then you can work through those things. If you don't have that, if you don't have a way of picking up the phone and saying, could we talk about this, then that's where you get into trouble, and that's where it gets very positional, and that's not helpful to the people of the, well, it's not helpful to the people of the province, but it's not helpful to the people of the country. Because remember, this is about partnering not just with Ontario, this is about partnering with all of the premiers. And I can tell you, my colleagues and I are very eager to have that first ministers meeting and actually be able to have a dialogue.
Okay, and finally, I want to ask you this. What's the one big thing that keeps you up at night? What's the one thing you're looking out for either the rest of this year into 2016 that really worries you? Only one.
Only one. There are lots of things at 3 in the morning. You know, I think that this conversation about what is our economy going to look like, and sometimes I think of it in terms of what's the work going to be. I've got a 2-year-old grandson and a 4 and 6-year-old granddaughters. What is their work going to look like? You know, what is it that they are going to be confronting in terms of their opportunities? You know, we're actually not that different in age, and so I can remember in the 70s talking about, you know, the nature of work and the 3-day work
And
week
everybody had jobs for 30 years.
Yeah, exactly. So it's completely changed, and but even then, the futuristic discussion about what work was going to look like, well, that hasn't transpired. People aren't working 3 days a week, and the nature of work is changing, and you know, we talk about manufacturing. Well, the reality of advanced manufacturing is there are fewer jobs.
Yeah.
And so we have to be very live to a discussion about what do we expect people to be doing and how do we prepare them for that. And so when we talk about entrepreneurialism and creating opportunities for young people to have workplace opportunities, we've got to start in kindergarten. You know, we've got to start when kids are very, very little, helping them to use their capacity for creativity and critical thinking and elicit that from them, because that's going to be our edge in the global economy.
And it has changed so much. Even part-time work now is so much different than when you and I probably had part-time jobs.
Absolutely.
In high school and that. People working right to the limit, you know, 0 hours, they get called in, you know, and so many more part-time jobs. The labor market has changed so much.
Well, and I go into a lot of Tim Hortons around this province, and it's not kids who are working the Tim Hortons jobs, right? It's women my age who are working in Tim Hortons, and they're there because they have to be, and that's one problem. But the other problem is that kids are having a different experience of work early on. So if I had to say the thing that keeps me up at night, that really is it, because that sort of encompasses everything. And when I talk about the economy being about our quality of life and being about our education and our healthcare system, if we don't figure out those big economic realities, we can't do the other things that we are called upon to do.
Okay, all right, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks. Good fun.
That was fun.
Yeah.